I had just clocked out after one of those long shifts that seem to drag forever. You know the kind where your legs ache, your head's pounding, and all you want to do is get home and collapse into bed. It was a quiet night at the diner, and by the time I walked out to the parking lot, the sky was covered in thick clouds, like it was going to rain any second. But it didn't. The air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Even the wind was still, not a single leaf moving on the trees lining the road. Everything felt off. I tossed my bag onto the passenger seat and climbed into the car, letting out a long sigh. My phone had died about halfway through my shift, which wasn't a huge deal. Normally, I just plug it into the car charger, but of course, tonight the charger decided to quit on me. So, it was just me, the empty road, and the soft hum of the car's engine for company. As I pulled out onto the road, I realized just how quiet it was. No traffic, no people, not even the usual stray dog that wandered near the diner sometimes. It was as if the entire town had gone to sleep, but not in the usual peaceful way. This was different. The streets were completely empty, not a soul in sight. I live out on the outskirts of town, so driving home this late was usually a little lonely, but tonight it felt like more than that. It felt eerie. I kept my eyes on the road, trying to shake the weird feeling creeping up my spine. The sky was dark, but it wasn't raining. Not yet. Anyway, the clouds looked ready to burst, but they just sat there, heavy and unmoving. It made the air feel thick, like I could almost taste the storm that was brewing but never coming. I couldn't help but glance in my rearview mirror, though I didn't know why. I was alone. I knew I was alone, but something didn't feel right. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was this nagging sense of unease, like I was being watched, even though there was no one around. It made my skin prickle and the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I turned the radio on, hoping to drown out the quiet with some noise, but all I got was static. No stations, just the crackling hiss of empty air. I flipped through a few channels, but it was the same on every one. Just white noise. I turned it off, the silence in the car suddenly feeling louder than the static ever had. The road stretched out in front of me, long and empty, swallowed up by the darkness ahead. The headlights of my car cut through the gloom, but everything outside that narrow beam of light was just nothing. No houses, no streetlights, no other cars. Just me, my headlights, and the black void beyond them. As I drove further out of town, the feeling in my gut only got worse. It was like I couldn't shake the idea that something was off, like something was watching me. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see headlights or maybe a shadow. Anything, but it was just the empty road behind me. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. I had been driving for a while, the uneasiness growing with each mile I put between myself and the diner. The road stretched endlessly in front of me, and the silence of the night felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, more out of habit than anything, just to reassure myself that I was still alone on the road. And for the first few minutes, but then halfway home, I saw them headlights. At first, they were far back, just a faint glow in the distance, barely noticeable. I figured it was just another car, someone else making their way home after a long day like me. I didn't think much of it at the time. People drove this road occasionally, though not usually this late. Still, I figured it was nothing. But as the minutes passed, those headlights never went away. They were just there, following at a steady distance, far enough not to be suspicious, but close enough for me to notice. I shrugged it off. It's fine, I told myself. Just another driver heading home. But after a few more minutes, I started to feel the tension in my neck build. I tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead, but my eyes kept flicking back to the mirror, watching those headlights, still there, still following. I took a right turn onto one of the smaller roads that led out toward the countryside, expecting the car to keep going straight. Most people stayed on the main road. There was no reason for them to follow me down this back road. But when I glanced in the mirror again, those same headlights made the turn too. That's when the knot in my stomach tightened. The car wasn't gaining on me, and it wasn't backing off either. It stayed the exact same distance behind me, like it was perfectly content to just follow. It didn't make sense. I was on a narrow, bumpy road now, the kind people only take when they know where they're going. And it was late. Too late for anyone to be driving out here for no reason. I tried to shake off the creeping paranoia. Maybe they were headed in the same direction as me. It wasn't unheard of, but no matter how much I told myself that, the unsettling feeling didn't go away. My grip on the steering wheel tightened, my knuckles turning white. I pressed down on the gas just a little, enough to put more distance between me and the car behind. But the headlights didn't fade. They stayed right where they were, trailing behind me like a shadow. I made another turn, this time onto an even smaller road, hoping to lose them. My heart was starting to pound in my chest now, the anxiety creeping into my thoughts. I kept checking the mirror, willing the headlights to disappear around the corner. But when I looked again, there they were, still following. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a coincidence. Maybe they were just as lost as I was. But the longer I thought about it, the less that explanation made sense. I had driven this road dozens of times, and I knew how quiet it usually was at this hour. It wasn't the kind of place people just ended up. I hit the gas again, speeding up a little more, but the car behind me never sped up to match. It stayed the same distance, never falling behind, never getting closer. It felt like a game, like whoever was driving knew exactly what they were doing, keeping me in their sights but never letting me see them. My chest tightened, and I could feel the adrenaline starting to kick in. The idea of pulling over crossed my mind, but there was no way I was stopping out here, not in the middle of nowhere, not with someone following me. The thought of stopping made my skin crawl. I kept driving, my mind racing. Every time I glanced in the mirror, those headlights were there, and no matter how fast I drove or how many turns I made, they never faded into the distance. It was like they were waiting for something. I wasn't alone on the road anymore. And whatever was behind me, whoever it was, they weren't just going in the same direction. They were following me. I never take the back roads home. They're narrow, full of potholes, and wind through dense woods that always feel a little too isolated, even during the day. But tonight, I didn't care about any of that. My only thought was losing the car behind me, the one that had been following me for miles, sticking to me like a shadow. I needed to shake them. Without thinking twice, I made a sharp left onto the old dirt road. The tires kicked up dust as I veered off the main route, the car bumping and jerking as it hit the uneven ground. The road was barely wide enough for one car, framed by thick trees on both sides that loomed over the road like silent sentinels. Branches scratched at the windows as I sped down the path, the darkness between the trees swallowing everything beyond the beams of my headlights. My heart pounded in my chest as I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, hoping, praying, that the car behind me would just keep going straight. This wasn't a road anyone took unless they knew it well, and I figured no one would follow me down here unless they were just as desperate to lose me as I was to lose them. But as soon as I looked in the mirror again, my stomach dropped. The headlights were still there. The car had made the turn too, following me onto the dirt road like they knew exactly where I was going. And this time they were closer, much closer. The headlights glared in my mirror, brighter now, filling the car with harsh light that made it impossible to ignore. It didn't make sense. Who would take this road at this hour? No one should even know about this road, except the locals, and I was the only one who ever used it. The car bounced over the uneven ground, the tires skidding slightly as I pushed the gas pedal down harder. My heart was racing, adrenaline pumping through my veins as I tried to put more distance between me and the car behind. But no matter how fast I went, the headlights stayed right there, close enough now that I could make out the shape of the vehicle behind me. It was an older model, boxy, its headlights piercing through the dark like glowing eyes. The road twisted and turned, the trees pressing in from both sides, but the car behind me never wavered. They kept pace, turning when I turned, speeding up when I did. My palms were sweaty, slipping on the steering wheel as I fought to keep control of the car on the rough terrain. Panic started to set in. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. Whoever was driving that car, they were following me. And they weren't just trailing behind out of curiosity, they were staying on me like they had a plan. My breathing grew shallow, my heart pounding harder as I tried to think. I could feel the fear tightening in my chest, making it hard to focus. I had taken this road because it led deeper into the woods, hoping it would confuse them, maybe force them to turn back. But they hadn't hesitated for a second. They knew exactly where I was going. The dirt road twisted again, and I could feel the car slipping slightly as I navigated a sharp curve, the headlights behind me flashing in the mirror, blinding me for a second. I blinked, trying to focus on the road ahead, but all I could think about was how close they were getting. Too close. I took another sharp turn, this time faster than I should have, and the car fishtailed for a second before I regained control. My heart was in my throat as I glanced in the mirror again, half expecting the headlights to disappear around the last bend. But they were still there, closer than ever. The car behind me was relentless. I kept pushing forward, the trees on either side of me turning into dark blurs as I sped down the dirt road. My knuckles were white from gripping the wheel, and my breath came in short, panicked gasps. I could feel the weight of the car behind me pressing in, like it was chasing me down, getting ready to overtake me at any moment. The road felt narrower with every mile, the trees closing in like they were swallowing the road whole. I couldn't understand it. Who would follow me down here, into the middle of nowhere? It didn't make any sense. This wasn't a place anyone came unless they knew where they were going. And even then, not at this hour. The headlights behind me never wavered, never dimmed. The driver wasn't making any moves to pass me, but they weren't falling back either. They just stayed there, lurking like they were waiting for something. A pit of dread settled deep in my stomach. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some random driver. This felt personal, but that didn't make sense either. No one knew I took this road, not even my friends. I'd only taken it tonight out of desperation to lose them. But now it seemed like they had been waiting for me to make that turn. The road ahead started to narrow even more, the trees pressing in, their branches scraping along the side of the car as I sped forward. My heart was pounding in my ears, the sound of my own breath coming in quick, panicked bursts. The headlights behind me flickered again as the car hit a bump, but it never slowed down. I had to figure out a way to lose them. But out here in the middle of the woods, on a road that seemed to stretch on forever, I wasn't sure how. I tried to calm myself down. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the car behind me was just some random person who lived out here, someone who happened to be going the same way. It was late, sure, but that didn't mean something sinister was going on. It had to be a coincidence, right? But the knot in my stomach tightened with every passing second. No matter how many times I told myself it was nothing, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My heart was still racing, and my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The car behind me wasn't speeding up or slowing down. It was just there like it was waiting for me to make a move. I glanced in the rearview mirror again, my eyes flicking from the road ahead to the glaring headlights behind me. They seemed to pulse in the darkness, glowing brighter than they should have been. My mind was running in circles, trying to come up with an explanation that made sense, but nothing did. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow. In the back seat. It was just a flicker, a quick blur in the dim light of the dashboard, but it was enough to send a wave of cold panic through me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a split second, I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. The shadow had been there, dark and quick, like someone moving in the back seat. My mind went blank, and before I knew it, I snapped my head around, expecting to see someone crouching behind me, hidden in the darkness. But when I turned, the seat was empty. Nothing but the pile of clothes I'd thrown back there earlier. The car was as empty as it had been when I left work. "Get it together," I muttered, my voice shaky and too loud in the silent car. I forced myself to look forward again, my eyes on the road. But the panic was still there, crawling up my spine. My pulse was racing, and every part of me felt tense, like I was bracing for something, though I didn't know what. My brain was spinning, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Or maybe it was what I thought I'd seen. Had it really just been a shadow? A trick of the light? Or was my mind playing tricks on me because of the stress, the fear creeping in from the car behind me? I swallowed hard, my throat dry, trying to convince myself it had been nothing more than my imagination. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just that. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to focus on the road, to push the paranoia away, but it was impossible. Every few seconds, I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror again, searching for the shadow, for any sign that something or someone was back there. But each time, the seat was empty. The feeling didn't go away, though. The sense that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone in the car, clung to me like a weight. My skin prickled, and my breath came in short, shallow bursts. I kept driving, my eyes flicking between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, but nothing seemed real anymore. The headlights behind me, the trees blurring by, the darkened back seat, they all felt like pieces of a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I knew it wasn't just the car behind me that was making me uneasy. It was something else, something inside the car. The longer I drove, the more that feeling of being watched grew, gnawing at my insides. I could practically feel eyes on the back of my neck, cold and heavy, like someone was staring right through me. I tried to shake it off, tried to tell myself it was just my nerves, that I was freaking myself out for no reason. But it wasn't working. No matter how many times I told myself I was alone, I couldn't believe it. I had to keep my focus on the road, on the car behind me, but I could barely think straight. My mind kept circling back to that shadow, that brief flicker in the back seat. I couldn't shake the image from my head, the idea that someone was sitting there just out of sight, watching me. The more I thought about it, the worse it got. Every bump in the road, every flicker of light from the trees outside, made me jump. I was so on edge that I could barely keep my hand steady on the wheel. I glanced in the mirror again, but this time, I didn't look at the headlights behind me. I looked at the back seat. It was empty, of course. It had been the last dozen times I checked. But somehow, that didn't make me feel any better. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. The road had gotten rougher the farther I drove, the dirt turning into thick gravel, and potholes scattering every few feet. My car bounced and jerked with every bump, making it impossible to keep up the speed. I knew I had to slow down. I didn't want to, but the car felt like it was going to fall apart if I didn't. The headlights behind me didn't let up, though, still glaring in the rearview mirror like twin eyes, locked onto me. I eased off the gas, my foot trembling as I let the car slow down. Maybe if I slowed enough, the car behind me would pass. That's what normal people do, right? They pass. They go around. I kept telling myself that's what would happen. They'd see me slow down, realize I wasn't in their way anymore, and just drive off, leaving me alone in the dark. My house was only a few minutes away, tucked behind the trees just off the road. I was so close to being home, so close to being safe. If I could just get rid of them. But the headlights stayed right there. No closer, no further. I could feel the sweat building in my palms, making my grip on the steering wheel slick. My heart was pounding so loud it felt like it was echoing in my ears. I was almost home, but the fear wasn't going away. Instead, it was getting worse. The road was too narrow to pull over completely. And even if I did, the idea of stopping with this car behind me felt like a death sentence. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, watching those lights, hoping they'd swerve past me and disappear into the night. But they didn't. They just stayed right where they were, like a predator stalking its prey. My heart raced faster with every second, my mind running wild with thoughts I couldn't control. What if they weren't planning on passing me? What if they were waiting for me to stop? What if this was some sick game? I could barely think straight, every muscle in my body tense, my fingers aching from gripping the wheel so hard. I kept looking back, waiting for the car to make its move, waiting for those headlights to close the gap between us. But they didn't. Then, without warning, the car behind me did something strange. It stopped, not gradually like I had, but suddenly like they'd hit the brakes hard. The headlights stayed just out of view, far enough back that I couldn't see the car clearly anymore. I squinted into the mirror, trying to make sense of it. It was like they didn't want me to see them anymore, as if they were hiding just beyond the edge of my sight. My stomach turned as I stared into the darkness. The headlights didn't move. They stayed exactly where they were, frozen at the far edge of the road behind me. I slowed my car down even more, crawling along the rough road, my heart pounding harder in my chest. Why had they stopped? What were they doing back there? The knot of fear in my gut tightened, twisting and turning as I tried to figure out what to do next. Should I stop too? Should I keep driving? Every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep going, to get home, but something about the way that car had stopped, so deliberate, so intentional, made me feel like something was very wrong. I was almost home, just a few more minutes, and I'd be safe. I kept repeating it to myself, trying to push back the rising panic. But it didn't help. I couldn't shake the feeling that the car behind me wasn't done with me, that they were waiting for something, waiting for me. I glanced at the road ahead, then back at the headlights behind me. They hadn't moved. They were still there, still waiting. My throat tightened, my pulse thundering in my ears. I was so close to home, but it didn't feel like I'd made it out yet. The night had grown even darker, the trees on either side of the road looming like shadows, stretching toward the car. The headlights from behind had cast long, eerie shapes into the trees as they followed me. But now those shapes were still, like they'd been abandoned. I slowed down to a near crawl, barely moving, hoping they'd just disappear. Maybe I'd look back, and the headlights would be gone, swallowed up by the night. But when I looked again, they were still there, exactly where they had stopped, almost as if they were watching me from the distance, waiting for me to make the next move. My house was just a few turns away now, and I had a decision to make. Keep going, knowing that the car might follow me all the way home, or stop and face whatever was happening behind me. I couldn't breathe. The fear had settled deep in my chest, and every second felt like it stretched on forever. I kept driving, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead, trying to shake off the panic that had been building for the past half hour. I didn't dare look in the rearview mirror again. Whatever the car behind me was doing, whether it was still there or had stayed back at that strange stop, I didn't want to know. All I could do was get home. I repeated it over and over in my head, like a mantra. Just get home. The road became more familiar as I neared my street. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but my chest felt a little lighter, like maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was coming to an end. I hadn't seen the headlights behind me since that strange stop, and I convinced myself that it was over, that they'd given up and left me alone. As I made the turn onto my street, I finally exhaled a long, shaky breath. The pressure in my chest started to ease, and I loosened my grip on the wheel. My house was only a few blocks away. I could already see the faint glow of porch lights dotting the darkened neighborhood. I started to think that maybe it had all been in my head, that my mind had been playing tricks on me. The paranoia, the fear, it all seemed to unravel as I got closer to home. I allowed myself to relax, just for a second. But then, something darted across the road in front of me. It happened so fast that I barely had time to register it. One moment, the road was clear, and the next a dark shape shot out from the shadows, moving so quickly it was just a blur. My heart lurched in my chest, and I slammed on the brakes, my car screeching to a halt. The tires skidded on the pavement, the sound echoing through the quiet street. I sat there, frozen, my breath caught in my throat, staring at the spot where the thing, whatever it was, had just been. My pulse was racing, my mind struggling to catch up. It had been big, whatever it was, too big to be a stray dog or a deer. But it had moved so fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. I blinked, my eyes scanning the road ahead, but there was nothing. No sign of what had crossed in front of me. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was going to break through my chest. I tried to make sense of it. Was it an animal? A person? I didn't know. I hadn't seen it clearly enough to tell. It had been just a dark blur, a flash of movement that came and went in an instant. Whatever it was gone now, vanished into the darkness on the other side of the street. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, and forced myself to look around. My headlights illuminated the road in front of me, casting long shadows across the street and the trees that lined it. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. I sat there, frozen, too afraid to move, my heart racing in my chest. The fear that had been fading only moments ago came rushing back, stronger than before. Something had crossed the road in front of me, something big, something fast. And now it was gone, hidden somewhere in the darkness, watching, waiting. I kept my foot on the brake, my car still at a standstill in the middle of the road, trying to decide what to do. My house was just a block away. If I could just get there, I'd be safe. But the thought of moving, of driving through the spot where the thing had been, sent a chill down my spine. I glanced at the trees lining the road, half expecting to see eyes staring back at me from the shadows. But the night was still, the trees swaying gently in the breeze, as if nothing had happened. As if whatever had crossed the road was long gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there. I could feel eyes on me, the same way I'd felt back on that dirt road. That overwhelming sense of being watched. My pulse quickened, my breath coming in shallow, panic gasps. I forced myself to take a deep breath to calm down. It was probably just an animal, I told myself. Maybe a deer, or a stray dog. I hadn't seen it clearly, after all. It could have been anything. But no matter how hard I tried to rationalize it, the fear wouldn't go away. The weight of that thing's presence lingered, heavy in the air. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I eased my foot off the brake and slowly pressed down on the gas. The car inched forward, my hands shaking on the wheel as I passed the spot where the thing had crossed. I couldn't stop myself from glancing to the side, toward the trees, expecting to see something lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. I exhaled shakily, my body tense as I drove the final stretch to my house. I pulled into the driveway, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror one last time. Still no headlights, no movement, just a quiet street behind me. But the unease stayed with me. The memory of that dark shape darting across the road burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't really gone. It was still out there watching. I pulled into my driveway, hands still trembling as I killed the engine. My heart hadn't slowed since the thing darted across the road. And even sitting in the safety of my driveway, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that had followed me all the way home. I wanted to believe that whatever crossed my path was gone, just some stray animal or a trick of the light. But the air around me felt heavy, and that ever-present feeling of being watched clung to me like a shadow. I turned the key to start the car again, just to roll it into the garage. The engine roared to life, the sound too loud in the otherwise still night. I tried to calm myself, telling myself that I was home now, that nothing bad could happen here. But that deep, gnawing fear wouldn't let go. I moved the car slowly, my eyes scanning the trees around me, expecting to see something lurking just out of view. I couldn't help it. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of the leaves felt like a warning. I gripped the steering wheel tightly, my palms slick with sweat, telling myself I was just being paranoid. That's when I heard it, a soft, muffled thud coming from the back of the car. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was faint, like something shifting in the trunk. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe I had left something loose back there, a toolbox, a bag, something that had slid around as I drove. But no, I hadn't put anything in the trunk. I knew that for a fact. Another thud, this time louder. My chest tightened, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. It wasn't just something shifting. It was deliberate, like someone or something was moving inside the trunk. The sound was unmistakable now, and it sent a wave of cold fear washing over me. I gripped the wheel even tighter, my knuckles turning white, my body locked in place. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Get out of the car. That's what my brain was screaming at me. Every instinct I had told me to run, to get as far away from the car as possible. But my body wouldn't listen. I was frozen, too terrified to do anything but sit there, my eyes wide, staring straight ahead as the thuds grew louder. Another one. This time it felt like the whole car shook. The fear was suffocating, pressing down on me like a heavy weight. I wanted to turn around, to check the back seat, to see if there was something or someone back there. But I couldn't bring myself to look. I was terrified of what I might see. My mind raced through every terrible possibility. Someone hiding in the trunk, some creature crawling around back there, waiting for the right moment to strike. It's nothing, I told myself. It's just the bumps on the road. But I knew it wasn't. The bumps on the road hadn't made this noise before. This was different. This was deliberate. I could feel it. Something was back there. I just didn't know what. I kept driving, my eyes glued to the road, trying to pretend that everything was normal, that I wasn't hearing the strange noises coming from the trunk. But my heart was racing, and my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the car straight. I couldn't ignore it anymore. There was something in the trunk. The rational part of me wanted to pull over, to get out and open the trunk and just check. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was all in my head. But the fear that had settled deep in my bones told me not to. Asterisk, don't stop. Don't check. Asterisk, my gut told me that whatever was back there, I didn't want to see it. Another thud. Louder this time. Closer. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I could feel the panic rising in my chest. I could hear it now, scratching, faint but steady, like something was trying to claw its way out. My mind was spinning, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run, but my hands stayed locked on the steering wheel. I pressed the gas pedal down harder, desperate to get the car into the garage, to get inside, to lock the door behind me. I didn't know what I was running from, but I knew I needed to get away from it. The noise continued, soft thuds and scratches coming from the trunk, growing louder with each passing second. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to look back, refusing to acknowledge that something was wrong. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was back there was getting closer, inching its way toward me. Finally, I pulled the car into the garage, the headlights cutting through the dark, casting long shadows on the walls. I killed the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after the constant thrum of fear. I sat there for a moment, my body frozen, my mind reeling. The thudding had stopped, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt like the quiet before a storm, thick and heavy. I could feel it, the thing in the trunk, waiting, watching. The fear was suffocating now, so thick I could barely breathe. I knew I had to move, but my body wouldn't respond. Get out, my mind screamed at me. Get out of the car. I reached for the door handle, my hand shaking, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst. I finally pulled into my driveway, my entire body tense, muscles aching from gripping the steering wheel so tightly. My chest heaved with every shallow breath, and for a moment, I just sat there, engine idling, staring blankly at the darkened house in front of me. The familiar sight of home should have brought me some relief, but it didn't. The lingering dread from the night's events clung to me like a heavy weight. I put the car in park and turned off the engine, the sudden silence around me almost suffocating. My heart was still racing from the strange noises I'd heard in the back of the car, the soft thuds that had grown louder, more deliberate. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was nothing. Maybe the road was rougher than I thought. Maybe something had shifted in the trunk. But no matter how many excuses I came up with, the unease wouldn't go away. I took a deep breath and reached for my keys. The metal felt cold and sharp in my hand as I fumbled with them, trying to focus on something, anything to calm myself down. But as I moved to open the door, something made me freeze. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Across the street, just at the edge of the darkness, there was a figure. I blinked, my heart skipping a beat as I tried to focus on what I was seeing. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, maybe the shape of a tree or a lamppost casting strange patterns on the ground. But no, it was definitely a person, tall still, standing perfectly motionless, just watching. My breath caught in my throat. My blood ran cold, and a shiver crawled down my spine. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, staring at me. I couldn't make out any details. The shadows were too thick, the night too dark. But I knew, without a doubt, that someone was there. Someone was watching me. For a moment, I couldn't move. My body refused to respond, frozen in place as fear gripped me. My mind was racing, trying to process what was happening, trying to make sense of why someone would be standing there so still, so quiet. My instinct screamed at me to get inside, to run, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure. I blinked again, and in that split second, the figure was gone, vanished. One moment they were there, and the next the space was empty, as if they had never been there at all. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short gasps. I scanned the area, my eyes darting back and forth, desperate to catch another glimpse of the figure. But the street was empty now, the shadows still. Nothing moved. It was like the night had swallowed them whole. My hands were shaking as I finally forced myself to open the car door. The cool night air hit me like a wave, but it didn't help. My legs felt like lead as I stepped out of the car, every muscle in my body tense. I looked around again, half expecting to see the figure reappear, but the street remained empty. My eyes lingered on the spot where I had seen them, the darkness taunting me, daring me to come closer. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. The feeling of being watched hadn't left. If anything, it had intensified. I could feel eyes on me, burning into my back as I walked toward the front door. My movements were slow, cautious, like I was afraid that if I moved too quickly, something would happen. I fumbled with my keys, my hands trembling so badly that I almost dropped them. My heart pounded harder as I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see the figure again, but there was nothing. Just the empty street and the oppressive silence that hung in the air like a heavy fog. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way my skin prickled, the way my chest tightened with each passing second. Finally, I got the key in the lock and turned it, pushing the door open with more force than I intended. I stepped inside, closing the door behind me as quickly as I could. The sound of the lock clicking into place brought a small sense of relief, but it wasn't enough. The feeling of being watched lingered like a weight pressing down on me. I leaned against the door, my body shaking, my heart still racing. The house was dark and quiet, but it felt safer than the street outside. For a moment, I stood there trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself that it was over, that I was safe. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I hadn't imagined that figure. Someone or something had been out there watching me. And now, they were gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't gone for good. They were still watching. I made it inside, slamming the door behind me and turning the lock with shaking hands. But locking the door didn't make me feel safe. Not even close. The sense of unease clung to me like a shadow, and no matter how many times I told myself I was home, that I was finally alone, it didn't settle the gnawing fear deep in my gut. I moved quickly through the house, checking every lock, every window, making sure everything was secure. The house was quiet, but my thoughts were a chaotic storm. Each creak of the floorboards beneath my feet made my heart jump. Every distant noise from outside had me glancing over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was still watching me. The figure in the shadows, the noises from the car, that strange thudding, it all swirled together in my mind, refusing to let me rest. And then it hit me, the trunk. The thuds I had heard earlier, the noises that had been growing louder as I drove home. Whatever had been making them, it could still be there. I froze, my breath catching in my chest as my mind raced back to the moment I'd first heard the sound. My heart began to pound all over again, the fear surging back in waves. I turned toward the window, staring out at the car sitting in the driveway. The streetlight cast long shadows over it, making it seem almost menacing in the stillness of the night. I didn't want to check. I didn't want to know what was inside the trunk. My entire body screamed at me to stay inside, to leave it alone, to lock the door and never look back. But I had to know. I couldn't let this fear consume me. The longer I waited, the worse the fear grew, gnawing at me, telling me that whatever was in there wasn't something I wanted to find. But I grabbed the flashlight anyway. I couldn't stop myself. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the door, my hand shaking as I unlocked it and stepped outside. The cold air hit me instantly, chilling me to the bone. The street was dead silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like the world itself was holding its breath. I swallowed hard, the flashlight trembling in my grip as I slowly made my way toward the car. Every step felt like it took an eternity, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I could barely hear anything else, just the sound of my own pulse racing as I approached the trunk. The closer I got, the more my fear escalated. What if something or someone was really inside? I reached the back of the car, my hand shaking violently as I raised the flashlight. The beam of light flickered across the surface of the car, casting eerie shadows along the ground. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but it didn't help. My hands felt numb as I reached for the latch. The cool metal felt too real under my fingertips, like it was pulling me into the moment, forcing me to confront whatever was inside. My heart was in my throat. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a deafening rhythm that blocked out the quiet night. My mind raced, imagining all the worst possibilities. What if someone had been following me? What if they were hiding in the trunk, waiting for me to open it? I squeezed my eyes shut for a brief second, gathering the last bit of courage I had. And then I pulled the latch. The trunk popped open with a quiet click, the lid rising slowly. I shined the flashlight into the dark space, holding my breath as I scanned the inside. It was empty, completely, utterly empty. I stood there, frozen, staring into the hollow space of the trunk, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. There was nothing, no sign of anyone or anything, no hidden figure, no explanation for the noises I had heard on the drive home. The trunk was as bare as the night around me. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was quickly followed by confusion. I had been so sure there was something inside. The noises had been real. I hadn't imagined them. My body was still tense, my heart still racing, but there was nothing here. Nothing to explain any of it. I let out a long, shaky breath, my hands still trembling as I closed the trunk and stepped back. The cold air wrapped around me like a heavy blanket, but for the first time that night, I didn't feel the same weight of fear pressing down on me. The trunk was empty, but the feeling that something had been following me, that someone had been there in the shadows, watching me, that feeling didn't leave. Even as I stood there, staring at the closed trunk, I couldn't shake the sense that the night wasn't done with me yet. I turned, scanning the empty street one last time, before hurrying back inside and locking the door behind me.